Wait, I don't know how to record. I was wrong.
It's a button down at the bottom, but it's okay. I got it.
It says record.
Okay. I think it's because I have the screen share on.
Yep.
Oh, well.
Very well could be.
We ready to go? Probably we have a little time.
Let's give it a minute and 31 seconds.
Okay.
So Trey, are you gonna talk about this text you just sent me?
Don't have to.
I think
I
it's
mean,
interesting.
we can. It's just
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
The point is just that, like, so Michigan, it's technically construction workers as of right now are not essential, but odds are that's going to change.
And it highlights the arbitrariness of what that is.
Well, the reason I said it to you is because I was just CNBC's on downstairs right now, and this is the arguments that they're having.
Oh, really? Well, we could just turn that on.
Yeah, right.
Trey, you ready to go for it?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us again for the second installment of Closing Bell. I'm Alex Schaefer, and I'm joined by Trey Malone. We are two assistant professors in the Ag Econ department at Michigan State. Our goal here is kind of just to talk through what's going on in the world right now with specific emphasis on food and agriculture, especially food and agriculture in Michigan, and think through the implications of both what's going on and then how state, local, and federal governments are addressing these issues. So Trey, once you start by I feel like the world has changed a little bit since we talked last week. Could you start by giving us a quick summary of how the world has changed?
Yes, and while I do that, I will be pouring my local beer just to remind everybody that we need to be doing more of this, supporting our local businesses. So this is Black Magic out of Lansing Brewing Company, super high gravity beer. It's malt forward, as you will see, but it's important to remember that, in the beer sector, what we're seeing is that people are buying a lot of like 24 packs for simplicity. But the point of sale for craft breweries is usually not a 24 pack. So they're selling more of these like kind of smaller shelf items. And a lot of times you have to go to pick them up. That was true last week, just like it is this week. The things that are different this week, I threw up this slide last week about unemployment claims in Michigan, Kansas, and Louisiana. And I made this argument that, so in Louisiana, you saw this spike during Hurricane Katrina that looked a whole lot similar. Notice that Michigan unemployment claims last week, or filed the week before, were 129,000. Well, as of yesterday, the Michigan unemployment claims have topped 440,000 over the last few weeks. And where the United States last week, about 3.3 million people filed for unemployment. This week, 6.6 million people filed for unemployment. And the crazy thing is that probably undersells how many people are trying to file. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that suggests that there are a lot of people who are trying to file, but are struggling with the system. As you might expect, these unemployment systems are not necessarily set up to handle 9.9 million. That's 3% of the entire U.S. population trying to file for unemployment at the same time or in the same few weeks. So we're entering more and more uncharted territory as we move forward.
So one more point about that, the Hurricane Katrina distinction, you mentioned the short duration of that thing. That was really catastrophic in Louisiana, but I think another really important difference between that and this is that the people and the workers who were mobile were able to move out of New Orleans to seek employment. This is a US wide and even a global thing. So there is no mobility differences here, maybe sector to sector, but in terms of that being a local thing where this is a global thing, suggests that this is probably fundamentally different.
Yeah. And so as we move forward into this kind of new world, I think we're going to be saying that a lot more. That this is different than the past things that we've done, at least in your and my lifetime. I think last week I mentioned that I've been hammering through a lot of stuff on past pandemics. So I just finished a book on Zika called Zika yesterday, and that book is interesting because it talks about how public policy was formed, and the messaging was kind of set up around Zika. That was a fundamentally different threat, I think. And yet we still kind of bungled some of the messaging there. So, this is, at least at some level, we are learning. It has been worse the way that government organizations have operated in
And so,
history.
so tell me, I guess, so there is more unemployment. What other things have happened since last week?
Okay, so more states have issued stay-at-home orders. So we've got partial lockdowns in a handful of states that didn't exist before. This is as of today. It looks like most of the United States is in a full lockdown.
90% of the U.S. population.
Which is incredible. And so this is something that every state is dealing with differently, and so we're going to tease that out a little bit and with some geography later, but this is definitely kind of stepping towards more of a kind of a fully national lockdown situation. Although it is important to remind people that it's not entirely clear that the federal government has the authority to issue a national lockdown. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can't try or can't encourage all governors to enact some type of public policy in that space. But generally speaking, epidemic organization has largely centered on state governments.
And so, well, you talk about the federal government. Can you tell me a little bit about policy things that have changed at the federal level since we talked last?
Yeah, so at the federal level, we've seen the CARES Act. Actually, I'll jump back here just to highlight this again. So we've seen the CARES Act passed as of Friday of last week. It had passed Congress, but we were waiting on the president to sign it into policy. That's now happened. Now every group is now trying to figure out exactly what that looks like and how they can take advantage of the money that's available. So a lot of smaller businesses and kind of more food sector side of the ag value chain are going to be looking more at the small business loan programs, and there's a lot of money there. On the ag side, there's a fair amount of money it's kind of continuing the MFP program at some level, and a lot of money that's kind of going to try to support, I think, labor initiatives and other kind of touch points along the ag value chain.
So I think that's a perfect description of kind of how stuff has changed. And so I want to, I guess, remind people that are here with us that we have, the whole point of this is to be sort of a question and answer format. So if you do, as we're talking, have questions or are interested in additional points with what we're saying, there is the Q&A feature at the bottom here, and if you can type in that question, I'll be able to see that, and hopefully we can address those questions. With that respect, sorry, go ahead, Trey.
I said, and for those of you that are on Twitter at the same time, you can also tweet me. I'm seeing your tweets on my Apple Watch technology.
Oh wow, okay.
And so you could just live tweet at me. You please don't make fun of my Canadian tuxedo. I thought it felt appropriate as the weather has gotten nicer. And I've got Chacos on too. It's beautiful Chaco weather. But
I don't know how that could ever feel appropriate that that's what you should be wearing.
oh, Canadian tuxedos are always appropriate. Maybe next year or next week I'll wear a tie.
On top of that.
Naturally, yeah.
So, okay. So Trey, I said we've got this question and answer feature. I said that we will try to address your questions, but it turns out that I'm not amazing at that. So we had a few questions from last time that we didn't get to, or that the answers have kind of fundamentally changed. Our understanding of those answers have changed since we talked last time. So let's quick-ishly go through the questions that we missed from last time to try to get the full picture. And so the first question was, we talked about this shift from food away from home towards grocery stores. To what extent in the short term is the food supply chain going to be able to make that shift from food away from home, from restaurants, institutions to grocery stores? And then to what extent after this ends, will that shift be able to go back?
Well, that's the conversation that I think everybody across the United States is having. You can't not find that article on any news outlet right now. And so this is some data that I think is pretty cool, actually. So the first piece of this data is supermarket foot traffic, and then on the other side of the screen, it's counter service restaurant foot traffic. So I know this is sketchy to find out, but it is true. Your cell phone is tracking where you are at any given time. And so this is from data from your cell phone, from everybody's cell phone in the United States, and it's comparing how much foot traffic is coming into supermarkets where the orange line is 2019 and the blue line is 2020. So if you'll notice, and it's anchored to January, don't really worry about that for the point that I'm going to make. If you'll notice, there was this kind of explosion in foot traffic in supermarkets at the beginning of March. So that's exactly what we were seeing, right? If you go into the grocery store, I mean, the lines are crazy, the shelves were picked over, etc. But over the last week or so, we've seen a decrease in that foot traffic that is a little bit more consistent with maybe the normal. That tracks fairly well with that IRI scanner data that I talked about last week that said panic buying is slowing down. Now, the data that also really pops out is the counter service restaurant data. So as you would expect, relative foot traffic for counter service restaurants has basically been cut in half at least. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of standard data. It's probably exactly what you're looking at. And that's what everybody's talking about. Now, we can also see this in how valuations have played out on the stock market. Okay, so this is food company valuations in their relative magnitude of loss. I stole this from an economist at Tufts named Bill Masters. So if you look, institutional food, which is like the Sysco, Amarak, even kind of McDonald's and Yum Brands, those are the groups that have seen a biggest loss in terms of food company valuations. Whereas the grocery stores and packaged foods they haven't been winners, but they haven't been as big of losers. So all of this kind of puts together this storyline to me that that we're looking at what I think is two different supply chains. I don't think we all realized it at the time, but now we're coming into this world where we're seeing that it's not necessarily that you can just shift your institutional food to your grocery store immediately. There has to be some type of a transaction that occurs. And some of those transactions are easy and some of them are hard. So the one that there was a fantastic article on Medium the other day about toilet paper. I think everybody's seen the toilet paper paranoia, at least in the news, right? So last week we said that we think the toilet paper thing has in large part been this psychological phenomenon that like people are panicking and so they're going to buy more. And while I do think there is some panic buying going on, and actually I'll just throw it up. So what everybody's getting wrong about the toilet paper shortage. Okay, so the article, which actually quotes a professor from Lansing Community College, goes into depth about how what is partly happening is you have two types of toilet paper, and all of a sudden we're using toilet paper in one location where we were using it in another place before. So where you were maybe taking your morning constitution at work, you are now no longer taking that morning constitution and buying toilet paper to accommodate such change. The problem is the toilet paper, as you might have noticed at your work, is not nearly at all the same toilet paper that you buy at home. And so those systems, at least in the short run, are set up for a capacity to match our standing consumer preferences, which I think is fascinating.
And so, absolutely. And so the question then is, given that we have these bifurcated supply chains, given that we've seen this massive shift away from restaurants and towards grocery stores, to what extent will we be able to reformat that bifurcation to send stuff towards grocery stores in the shortish or medium-ish term?
Well, in the fastest term, what you can do is what's happening in a lot of restaurants across the country, where restaurants are actually shifting their model to support some type of grocery sales, basically. So if you think about it, so here's some data from Business Insider. Based on a quick survey that the Restaurant Association put out, they're projecting 110,000 restaurants to be closing. Now, if you think about what that means, I mean, yes, the unemployment rate is obviously, it's terrifying in and of itself. But the other part is they have a lot of capacity. Most of these restaurants are buying, based on some type of projection of sales. So, whether that's the toilet paper that they have, the eggs that they have, the alcohol that they have these storable commodities and consumables that are on hand. So there are places like Los Angeles, I think Washington, D.C. has a couple examples. Austin has examples where restaurants are selling groceries. And so in the shortest term, that seems like the obvious solution. Now, you're not going to be able to get your 8-ply Charmin Comfort toilet paper, but you would still be able to have access to toilet paper pretty quickly.
So Trey, talk, because I think what was lost right there is the regulatory dimensions that gum that up.
Yeah, so we published a paper 3 years ago about the number of federal regulations it takes to get a beer. So from the hop yard to the pint glass or the 6-pack, how many regulations is it? Well, federal alone, it's in the 80,000 range of federal restrictions. And so what that means is every step along this value chain, there is some type of restriction that could potentially change the agility of these businesses to respond. So the big one with my whole narrative about restaurants being able to sell groceries, that's not going to work in some cases because like LA is shut down restaurants selling groceries without a permit. Although I will point out really quick, as of today, I think LA restaurants can officially sell grocery items. So we saw that restriction be removed.
In LA, yeah.
In LA, it's not the case most places yet, but there are places where so the FDA is relaxing its rules on egg labeling. So when you buy eggs as a restaurant, you're buying them in pallets. And when you go buy eggs at the grocery store, you're not buying pallets. You're buying maybe a dozen eggs here or there. At least according to the prior restrictions, there was a lot of question, and really it probably wasn't legal to buy eggs and then sell eggs again. So a restaurant couldn't buy their eggs and then go sell their eggs to consumers. Well, that's changing. So this article was literally just like a couple hours that came out about the FDA restrictions being loosened. So we're seeing this across the board. Massachusetts, so here's a Brewbound article. Massachusetts are letting restaurants sell alcohol to go. As I'm sure everybody's familiar, there is this, has been this push to try to find the most high revenue items for restaurants to try to avoid this catastrophic closing situation. And alcohol is one way that you might be able to do that. Now, in Michigan, we're not there yet, but there are states that are starting to pass legislation that would allow you to go pick up some booze and take it home.
And so, Trey, what I think, in short, what you're saying here is the ability of the supply chain to adjust to this from the private sector it's possible. The question about the length of time and the ability really is a regulatory question. The time it's going to take for regulations to adjust to allow these people to do these things, for restaurants to sell products. So I wonder, a question that we addressed last time, but I think we didn't do justice. I wonder if you could go to your next slide, which is the beef.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, so we're seeing, so Trey's got this slide here where we're seeing this interesting phenomenon in beef prices, where we see meat prices are rising, cattle prices are falling, and that's true of a whole bunch of different commodities, right? Where we're seeing the kind of farm gate prices tanking while we're seeing the prices at the retail level or the grocery store increase. And so the question last time that I think we didn't get fully is, when we're seeing that divergence in prices, who is collecting that premium, right? And I think that story is clear in an economic sense from the idea of scarcity, that we've got a contracted set of actors, agents in the supply chain that can sell this stuff to consumers in terms of food at home. And that's borne out in the figure that the price data or the stock price data that you put above, where the individual brands, the prices or the stock prices were falling, where when you looked at the retail sector, the grocery stores, stock prices remained constant relative to the rest of kind of the stocks on the whole. That suggests an increase. So those rents are going to grocery stores, going to the end point people who have those scarcity rents. You agree with that, Trey?
Yeah, and you know, this is this, especially on the beef side, is almost a tale as old as time, where you have some type of concentration in the production side, kind of up the supply chain, and there is this this fear of market manipulation. So you know, this is maybe an extreme example.
Well,
You
so
know,
I want to distinguish between a couple things here.
okay,
One is a thing that I think you were referring to as price gouging. Um, Another is the increase in marginal costs of delivery. And so increases in price related to increases in marginal cost, we expect to be a good thing. Increases in price as a result of market power, um, we tend to think of as a bad thing. Um, in the long run, if those are the result of scarcity rents, um, that should work itself out. So these regulations, if they were lifted, we should see some regulations banning sales of food from restaurants. We should see some of those premiums at the retail level even back out as those scarcity rents are dissipated.
yeah. Well, and I think, you know, a lot of our food system is tied up in some type of regulatory system. And so while I think if you remember back to your intro principles of microeconomics class, if unless it was in an ag econ department, and they shouldn't have taught it this way, but in a traditional econ department, they're going to be like, well, you know, the neoclassical supply and demand model fits perfectly for agriculture, and so look at these corn prices and quantities are all a function of supply and demand. And while that is partially true, that supply and demand does explain a lot of this, you have to remember that this is a very regulated industry. There are all types of price points and piece points that like are driven by some type of government policy.
Mm.
So as we move forward, I think we're going to find more and more of these pinch points along the agricultural production and distribution chain that we're going to have to rethink whether or not that's a legitimate law or a legitimate rule that we need to maintain enforcement.
I would say that differently, but I agree with the
Okay.
gist of it, that markets respond to policy incentives.
Yeah.
Tell me this, Trey. We've been talking about beef, dairy, corn. What about, and so those are all kind of staple products. What about luxury products? So someone last time brought up the issue of chocolate. How does coronavirus impact luxury items like chocolate?
Well, I mean, it's a cheeky response, but I mean, it really depends on the luxury item.
Let's
Uh,
talk about
so
chocolate.
so chocolate is going to be a very international system, and so there's actually kind of an interesting tweet that I saw the other day from Jason Lusk that mentioned a trade restriction tracker. And so basically this tracker is following all of the different countries who are implementing heightened trade restrictions due to the COVID-19 outbreaks. And those trade restrictions, I think, have the largest potential to disrupt the chocolate supply chain.
Mm.
Um, I mean, we also, I mean, chocolate is, especially luxury chocolate, high-end chocolate is going to be a labor-intensive product. So you're going to need some type of labor, specialized labor, to be able to produce some type of high-end chocolate. So you're going to run into some labor constraints. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Schaefer? You're
Yeah,
the
I think
treat guy.
so. So I ended my little comment last time with this touchy-feely thing that maybe this thing will make us all come together as a world, and it turns out that that was false, right? At least so far, that
Yes,
we're seeing exactly the same response here as we saw during the 07-08 food price spike, where we've got these exporting countries are worried about food security in their home regions, and so they're worried about taking care of themselves first. They import or they institute export taxes or export restrictions. So I just saw Russia is considering or has already implemented. I don't know whether it's in the works or has been done, but they're considering a restriction on wheat exports.
I was actually
Uh,
just going to bring up wheat. Yeah.
yeah, there you go. So we're seeing this return to protectionism for net importing commodities for the U.S. That is bad for consumers, right? Because that means that our prices
So
will increase.
on wheat alone, it's not just Russia. Kazakhstan's also already implemented an export ban, and Kazakhstan's a really big player in wheat. So, I mean, as you see, the one commodity futures price that stands alone there in this figure here is wheat. And I haven't run the model. You have to ask Bob Myers to run the model for you. But I would imagine a lot of this has to do with trade restrictions.
I'm going to ask you a question now, Trey, which we didn't plan, which is bad news. I know I'm going off script, but I think it's interesting. We saw on Twitter a couple days ago that plantings of corn have gone through the roof, right?
Yeah,
And I
soybeans up
look at,
too.
is that right? Okay, but I look at this thing and I say, what should we be planting? And this suggests wheat.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, planting for wheat is lower than it's been since they started counting.
Exactly. So I don't
So,
have an answer for that, which is a rude thing to throw you a question when I don't have a thought. But can
well,
you?
so I've tried to talk to a handful of just people out there in the ag world, and for those of you that are listening, feel free to tell me why this is wrong or why this is right or whatever. But the ag people I've talked to have been like, well, okay, so first of all, I don't really believe the USDA planting data. That was the first thing that I've had people say. They're like, well, if I talk to my friends, they're not up in corn that much. But then the other side of it is they say, well, we want to get some type of crop. And where people are planting wheat down in Oklahoma and Kansas, for example, it's been so wet that they're not sure that they're going to be able to get much of a yield out of wheat. So they think they at least they can get some type of harvestable commodity out of corn. Um, this is kind of far afield for me, but it's again something that's very much worth following.
Yeah, it's out of my comfort zone too, but it's something that seems counterintuitive to me
So,
from the price.
yeah,
So, but Trey, while we're here, there was
yeah,
another question that I did a bad job of asking last time, which is you
yeah.
put up a slide from last time, thank you, where we showed volatility in prices. You sort of showed that volatility has been increasing dramatically in all of these commodities as of March 24th. One attendee pointed out volatility in milk is virtually non-existent and has actually decreased in this latest period. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Sure. Before I jump too far in, Jim Hilker just texted me, the man, the myth, the legend, who
Oh,
retired
good.
this
Okay.
week.
Yeah.
And he says most wheat is planted in fall, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. Soybeans are down given the prevented plantings. So again, it's probably worth us maybe bringing on Hilker to talk about that stuff.
Oh, true enough. Yeah.
I've also gotten so Bob Myers just trash talked on me, so I thought I'd point it out that he says he wants your job because asking me to talk is the easiest job in the world.
It's true.
So,
You never freaking stop.
But back to dairy. So actually, Christy Apple on Twitter just asked me a few questions on dairy as well. So she asked how the milk dumping is connected to this shift, and I think this also starts touching on to this volatility question. Okay, so milk is in a tough spot right now. Yeah, Christy also just said wheat's planted in the fall. We're already past the point of being able to respond. So,
fair enough.
So the on the volatility piece, I think you can kind of go back to this milk question. I'm not a dairy economist, and so like I'm kind of armchairing this, but I think part of it is that at least as of right now, because fluid milk consumption is so largely tied to the school lunch program at some level, and with that school lunch program seeing a massive change in the way that we distribute food to people. Odds are, I think the volatility itself is low because we all kind of know where that demand is going to go.
Dude, I've got great news.
What?
Which is that you should stop talking because we have Chris Wolf on here.
Oh, no.
And so if I can figure out, actually, Megan, would you mind opening his microphone so that he could talk? Wait.
I have opened it and I have unmuted him if he's there and listening.
You there, Wolf?
It
Unmute
says,
yourself,
I think he's
Chris.
still muted.
Yep, it's not letting me unmute. He needs to unmute himself.
Participants.
He's probably taking a nap.
Wait. Oh, I can't unmute him either. Oh, wait.
Chris Wolf.
Is it working?
Yes.
Woohoo!
Well, I wanted to hear more wild speculation out of Trey.
Hey, I called you this morning. This is not on me.
Well, you called me this morning. You called me this morning. I bet you know how many Zoom calls I've been on this last week and all day.
As many as I have. All right. So tell me, explain to me this.
Well,
why is the volatility not so high in milk?
Well, hold on, back up. Which milk price are you telling me that there's not volatility in?
Let me see.
Because I can tell you right now that if you look at the April, May, and June futures price, it's 33% lower than we were last month.
Okay, so
volatility.
So the volatility is still there. So this is pulled off a volatility index that is a Fed slide. I actually stole it from Courtney Cowley last week.
Well, my guess is, look, keep in mind, farmers, if we're talking about farm price, farmers get paid with a lag. Okay? So if we go back 6 weeks, we had milk prices at farm level that were $18. Okay? But if we look 6 weeks out, they're about $13. So they won't see it, well, they'll start to see it in this next milk check. And then the one after that is going to drop off a cliff.
So you're saying just that the volatility is there, it's just delayed.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the wrong futures price here, basically.
Well, you look at class 3 and class 4, but class 3 in particular, futures price, you'll see it's about $13 for May. Well, you could have had $17.50, $17.75 2 months ago on that price for May.
Okay.
So right now, what we're seeing is that food away from home, right, has gone away. And that's about 25% of the meals, about 50% of the expenditures. Obviously, I mean, you guys have already talked about this, and food at home. So yeah, there was a spike in the retail sales of fluid milk, but you know, where it's not going to replace all of the food away from home, which was largely cheese. And so if you're making specialty cheese that we're selling through retail, through food service ones, that business is just going away. And then you've got situations like New York City, where right now, because of the coronavirus, I was on a call earlier today, and they can't get truck drivers that are willing to drive into the city to drop milk off. So they now have large parts of New York City where there is no fluid milk, even if there is demand, because people aren't going out and people don't want to deliver it in there. And so part of the discussion is, and unfortunately, we may see the similar logistical issues in other big cities that have this, right?
So then let's switch to that, because that's a topic, I guess, which is broader than just milk, right? Which is someone asked last time. They said our food is produced in some of the areas which we're seeing the fewest cases of coronavirus. To what extent is this a bright spot?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is like one of these things that, you know, on the front end, I think it kind of makes some kind of logical sense, but upon kind of further inspection, you know, the food system in the United States isn't exclusively limited to just rural and urban. So, you know, I get, like, I'm from Kansas, Oklahoma area, and yeah, there's a lot of rural places that grow things, but like if you look at California in my map here. So Schaefer made this point. He's like, look at all of the metro counties in California, but that's where so much of our food comes from. So these are metro areas that people aren't really, they're overlooking in this kind of system that where it's bifurcated. One place grows the food, the other place doesn't.
And there are a couple points there. The distinction between where the food is grown and the entire food supply chain. So it takes more than just the farmer to get that food from one of these light green areas to those people in inner city New York, inner city Detroit. If any point of that supply chain is at risk, that affects the whole supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we start getting into that conversation about like any point in the supply chain,
yeah,
you know, here's a great article that ran in the Daily Yonder just yesterday. Which, by the way, if you're interested in kind of rural development issues, Daily Yonder is a fantastic follow. But this is a map of infection rates in rural places, and if you'll notice, while infection rates in rural places are lower, there are spots in rural places that we actually have above the national average in infection rates. So I zoomed in on Michigan just to kind of give you a quick idea. Otsego County, with the county seat of Gaylord, has 24,000 people that live there, and they already have 19 cases. So while only 19 cases doesn't sound like that big of a deal if we're just comparing the total number in Detroit, for example, when you consider that their hospital system is built for 24,000 people, that total case rate actually explodes to 77.9 cases per 100,000 people. And so there is this situation where even if we think that rural places are where we grow our food, which they're not, but like even if they were, there would be this pushback in places like Otsego County. You know, if you go out to the panhandle of Oklahoma and everybody's getting ready to plant, and you all of a sudden have a huge infection of all of your John Deere mechanics, you're going to run into some type of issue there as well.
And so once you show, I guess, the figures that follow this to show.
Okay, so here's another map. This is Brookings data that shows like there are some pretty high, especially tourist destinations that are kind of in high risk places. So there's been a lot of articles written about how people or certain kind of people are treating this as a vacation where they just move to rural places. and go on vacation for a while in a rural place and just treat life like normal. That, I don't know, BuzzFeed ran an article yesterday about this. The one that I think we really want to talk about is, here's an article from a few weeks ago now, but it's the workers who face the greatest coronavirus risk. So this is all kinds of different industry groups that have an increasing risk of exposure to disease, while looking at the physical proximity to others at the same time. So for farm workers and laborers for crop nursery and greenhouses, while proximity is starting to kind of move towards some type of proximity, exposure to diseases is relatively low. As we move up the system, so here's my farm equipment and mechanics and service technicians. So now we've got more physical proximity and a higher exposure to diseases in general. But then when we start moving into farm workers, farm, ranch, and aquaculture animals, so this is where we start moving into a space where you have this small specialized industry or group of people who at the same time, by the way, have fairly low incomes. Their annual incomes come in about $26,000. So it's not like, a lot of times this is going to be your limited health care access, et cetera. While you still have this increasing risk associated with some type of exposure. And so just because like the farmer sitting in the tractor doesn't necessarily have so much of an exposure risk, that doesn't mean that the entire supply chain isn't at risk at some place.
And in fact, we're already seeing those risks play out. So many of you will have read the article about the workers at the meat packing plant in Greeley, Colorado, where, as I understand it, some of the supervisors tested positive for coronavirus. Workers just walked out of the facility in fear for that risk. And so, okay, so someone has asked whether we know anything about the possibility of zoonotic spread of livestock to humans. I don't know that risk. That's all I have to say about that. Do you have an understanding
just in
there?
general? I think it's
For
my
this novel coronavirus. Don't
don't-
lie if you don't know.
What's that?
Don't lie if you don't know.
I know you can't get it from dogs,
Okay.
but I don't really know where we sit on cows and hogs.
Don't sit on cows and hogs.
Well, I've been watching a lot of PBR.
Okay, so but we're unsure about that. You should ask someone who's much smarter than us about the kind of epidemiology, disease transmission issues.
First person that comes to mind is Felicia Wu, and I know that Felicia Wu's been out there talking about this. I think there's an MSU Today article that kind of floats or flirts with that. I'll tweet it out just so it's out in the ethos. We also got a question from Christy again about addressing migrant labor problems.
Felicia is the one who asked the question.
Oh no. Well, she should probably answer the question.
Yeah, sure enough.
We can unmute her if you want. That would maybe be good.
Felicia, would you like to be unmuted to share your thoughts on that? I haven't heard from her. She's maybe weighing that. So let me ask you this, Trey. So you've shown me the workers who face the greatest risk of coronavirus and how it extends kind of across the supply chain. You've also shown me earlier in this thing that 90% of Americans are under stay-at-home, shelter-in-place type regulations. To what extent does the arbitrariness of that or the increased risk for these workers who are deemed essential maybe affect economic outcomes for those workers and those industries?
Negatively. So I think trying to sort out how we kind of balance this system where you have particularly specialized labor that, just because you're good at picking blueberries doesn't mean you'd be any good in a hop yard. And so, I've actually gotten multiple emails from people asking this question of what if you see this massive spike in unemployment, which, according to some of the macro models I've seen, they put our unemployment numbers right now at about 13%. So why don't we just get or shift labor from that 13% unemployment from some other industry into agriculture? And I don't think that's necessarily the best solution without like a heavy amount of training on the front end. Ag labor, contrary to I think some urban popular myth, is very specialized and very difficult to pull off for anybody, but especially for somebody that doesn't have any type of ag background. While it's possible, I think probably the better alternative would be to come up with some type of gain in technology. This, we might have to science our way out of certain problems.
Well, okay. So if you don't have a lot of thoughts about the impacts for workers, tell me about the impacts.
Oh no.
Essential businesses and keeping distributional impacts across the supply chain.
Sorry, you cut out. What's
the question is the impacts of the essential versus non-essential distinction on businesses.
Okay, so yeah, now we're getting into non-essential, essential stuff. Okay, so this is a topic that I think I think has a lot of people shaking in their boots, especially on the hort side. The conversation that's kind of moved in this direction is that people have this belief that not belief. It's likely that this non-essential essential distinguishment has caused quite a few issues across the supply chain and across the distribution, especially as it relates to large big box retailers versus smaller retailers. And I think that's a totally fair conversation. So I just sent you an article that came out literally as I was walking upstairs to my office that was being discussed on CNBC about construction workers being considered essential business. And as of right now, at least, I'm pretty sure in Michigan, they're not considered essential business unless I've missed an article in 12 hours. So that obviously creates some equity distribution problems in that industry, but start thinking about like horticulture businesses, right? So right now it's absolutely beautiful outside. We only get like 7 sunny days in the whole state of Michigan for, most of the year. And we're having a sunny day right now. And I want to go plant things. Well, I can't go to my standard horticulture business to go purchase that thing. So maybe I'm going to go to Home Depot. Maybe I'm going to go to Walmart and pick it up. So there goes that business for that small business, the non-essential producer. This is scary to me. Sorry, I like talking with my hands. This is scary to me for these businesses, but from a consumer rights perspective, it makes total sense to me to try to protect my ability to go buy things in a store if the thing is being sold. Even though I think obviously the big box retailers have some type of an advantage on this. So I wanted to pull up my service places patterns again. So what we're looking at again is relative foot traffic in different locations. This is all brands are down, but if you'll notice, there is a couple that are worth highlighting. Walmart has seen this decrease. It's again pretty consistent with what we were talking about before. The one that really sticks out though is Home Depot. So at least if you look at the data, and remember this is normalized to the beginning of January in terms of sales. Home Depot sales have Home Depot foot traffic has stayed relatively consistent as to what they were doing at the beginning of January. And so this also lends some credibility to this story that at least in these home production systems and horticulture businesses, etc., there are at least some people who are going to buy their regular things at essential businesses, even though they're not necessarily essential items the way that they're defined.
And so this isn't a US specific issue, right? I have some data from the European Commission, who also has this essential business, non-essential business distinction, where people are prohibited from leaving their homes unless they're going to grocery stores or to get other non-essential or other essential items. And so someone from the European Commission sent me some data on what are the biggest sales increases relative to this pre-coronavirus time, and it's video games, right? So they're going to the grocery store, but what they're buying is something that I would not consider an essential product, and that has I get some benefits on the kind of boredom side of things, but it's also got some equity distribution issues for the small specialized shops versus in the US, Target, Walmart, these mega stores. And so my understanding is that some counties, at least I can think of a county in Indiana, who has decided on ways to regulate this. I wonder if you can talk about that and maybe
Well, they decided, and
the
then they changed their minds
implications.
yesterday.
What? I didn't know that. Okay,
So,
let's hear it.
well, they just got so much pushback. I mean, this made national news. So this is an Indiana county, North Indianapolis, not too far from Purdue, that they banned the sale of non-essential items at essential stores. So again, think about going to a Walmart and not being able to buy your video games. I mean, this was all over the place because people were so upset that they could go to the store and they could see the item, but they weren't allowed to buy it. It's a strange world that we live in, that we're trying to decide what businesses are the essential ones and what aren't. So, you see it on Twitter all over the place that, in 1920, we should just ban all alcohol. In 2020, alcohol is an essential business that we all have to support with all of our money. So, it's this kind of through the looking glass world where what an essential business is really depends on where you're sitting. And it's definitely one of those examples, I think, where business or government is choosing winners and losers.
But so let me press you a little bit harder on that, because I'm not sure this is a fair or holistic perspective here. So are you saying that your perspective is that this distinction essential versus non-essential, where we're closing all non-essential things, is not a good idea? That's what I got from that. So I just want to hit it a little more head on.
So, I mean, yeah, the libertarian in me says absolutely not. I think this is the idea of deciding what businesses are essential and non-essential. Just go fly in the face of at least my ideology. The other part of it is that I completely understand the rationale. So, if you go back and read about the Great Influenza, the swine flu or the Spanish flu back in 1920, cities were doing the same thing. They were banning, visits to movie theaters. They were canceling parades. They were trying to restrict the largest crowd sizes to smaller crowd sizes. So this doesn't necessarily violate the terms of the Constitution or the belief system that we have in the United States to begin with. But B, it's hard to say what's right. And this is obviously a cost-benefit analysis question, where we have to weigh the cost to the small producers, because you better believe the small producers are the ones that are going to be paying the most for this, against the perceived benefits of restricting sales in those locations.
Hold on though, because I want to be more explicit about this.
Okay.
The issue here is an issue of negative externalities, in that the risk that I face in my own behavior doesn't account for the whole costs of my actions. And so if I'm making these decisions, whether to go to the movie theater, whether to stay home, the costs of doing so from the perspective of society are bigger than the costs of doing so from my own perspective. And so this government action is intended to eliminate that choice for me, because of the fact that I am incentivized to push costs onto society through this disease externality, right? So by banning non-essential market behavior, what they've deemed non-essential market behavior, we are limiting that disease externality, albeit indirectly. But it's a way to try to force private behavior to align with social costs. And maybe that's not the most direct way to do it. And maybe the essential versus non-essential distinction seems arbitrary at some points. But I think it's important to recognize the disconnect between individual incentives and social optimality, socially optimal behavior. And we can think maybe from there, from that understanding, what would be a more efficient thing rather than griping about this arbitrary distinction between essential and non-essential.
I mean, that's a very economist, law and economics take on this. You know, you're right. That's a very, very well thought out argument. But try explaining that to the guy that owns the Hort business, who has already been losing his sales to Home Depot, and now not only is he losing his sales in one of the most important times in his entire buying cycle or selling cycle. He's now legally not even allowed to sell his product. And I think, you know, the frustrating thing is this lack of equity between the two groups. So if we want to think about a world where you have one or two really large sellers, so think Lowe's and think Home Depot, and then we have like hundreds of small horticultural businesses, it does feel super unfair and non-equitable that the people who are bearing the social cost are the small guys and not the big guys.
So, but what you're just saying right there, Trey, you are making an argument for more regulation. You are on the side of the Indiana County
or
rather
subsidy.
Than this. Oh, it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? And it importantly isn't. So your argument there is in favor of more regulation to ban, I think, to ban sales of non-essentials at these big places, and then
or allow these businesses to operate as they choose to operate.
Well, I won't explain the negative externality story again.
No, I know, but I don't have an answer to this. I'm just trying to kind of take a step back and think like this sucks. And there's a certain group of producers who are bearing more of the social costs than another group. And so there is this equity distribution problem.
That is nothing new in economics.
True.
The fact that some groups are hurt worse than others. The solution in the international or the free trade literature is just like you said, income transfer or transfers somehow through taxes, like we're doing in the CARES Act to.
So I'm going to say a very non-libertarian thing here. I don't think that the CARES Act went far enough for small businesses.
You are just a world of contradictions over there.
I know.
I don't like regulation, but I want the Indiana County ban.
No. I did not say that. I would never say that I want the Indiana County ban. I'm saying that I understand where it came from. I sent you that story immediately because I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard of. And then I thought about it a little bit, and you argued. You argued the other side. But the point is that if we're going to make these essential, non-essential distinctions, then we need to be more than willing and more accepting of a society to be able to subsidize or reimburse the people who we just shut down arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but be willing to shut down the places that are bearing the social cost more than another producer.
You're starting to sound more and more like a socialist, but I just want to I just want to highlight the political cost of doing that. So if we do that through taxes, that's something that's really politically costly if you're proposing a tax on everybody after we've all been hit hard, and you're doing this redistribution towards the hardest hit people. it's easier said than done. But I do want to highlight, so Michelle Klieger in the Zoom webinar chat has a really good plug for a book called Good Economics for Hard Times, where they discuss this issue of essential products. She's left this on the webinar chat. So Megan, is there a way to make that chat public so everybody can see her story here? Megan says yes.
I need her to put it into the Q&A, and then we can
Okay.
click answer, and then it'll allow it to go out to the public.
Michelle, can you can you put that rather than in the chat in the Q&A so that we, oh, thank you. And then I will say answer live. Thank you so much. And so let's see, Trey, we are at 4 o'clock. So unless you have other lies you want to tell these people, I think it is time for us to say goodbye for the week.
Not any lies, but I do want to say that everything I say is true. But the other part is that, you know, Schaefer and I are watching this as close as possible, and we're talking to a lot of people all week. And if you have questions or thoughts or concerns, or you know, you have something that you want to throw out there, feel free to contact either of us. You know, I tweet like a million tweets a day. So so if you want to get on Twitter and tweet at me, that's great. If you don't feel comfortable tweeting at me, my email's out there too. And actually, I think my cell phone's even on my website. So like, if you really want to harass me, I guess you could call me. But all in all, you know, everybody keep your head up. I know this sucks, but we're gonna get through it. So thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you listening.
Yeah, thanks so much.